How are you doing today? This is the Lectric Xpress. This is a 750 watt option, and it's a newish bike from Lectric. I've been taking my time to do this video because I think there's some really important things I have to tell you. Some videos might talk about how this is like the best bike since sliced bread, this torque sensor and blah 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 blah. Well, I'm going to show you three real pros of this, whatever that word just was, three pros of this particular bike. But there's a list of 5 cons that I just have to bring to your attention. And of those, 3 of those to me are near deal breakers. And that's going to be towards the end of the video. Before I give you a little tour of the bike, do a little show and tell with you and kind of show you some of the parts and pieces, I'm just going to tell you what those 3 biggest pros are. One is the programming. Lectric is really good about this. There's a lot of stuff you can change, including the way the power is coming out, some speed limits, some other things that adjust how the torque sensor is interacting. So there's some really great things you can do in the display itself, which I applaud Lectric for, opening it to that level access. The other pro is the torque sensor. It's not that common to have a torque sensor on this price point of a bike, which for this one was $1,299. I think normally $1,399, but if you know Lectric, there's always a sale of some sort going on. The 500 watt version of this, the lower version, is I think $999. And I'm going to tell you also at the very end of the video, if I was to buy this again, which I bought this bike myself, would I buy the 750 watt or I buy the 500 watt? And the third big pro is a UL listed battery. We're going to talk about some of the tech specifics here and also some performance stats briefly. In this down tube, there is one of these batteries, 48 volt, 14 amp hours, UL listed, non-branded cells. Good quality down tube style battery, real easy to use. I am getting an average range of 32 miles. Range test is riding as fast as this thing would go pretty much the whole time. And so you're still getting good mileage or a good amount of range when you're going faster, which is, I gotta say, that's a pretty good feature of this. The one thing you do lose though, with this higher torque output motor, so we're gonna switch over to the motor now. This is the M24 Stealth motor that has 85 Newton meters of torque. So higher torque motor is also a little more power hungry. For my ranking of efficiency on 48 volt bikes, this ranks near the bottom. There were 15 of 21, but there's actually only 2 750 watt bikes that are lower than this, both from Rad Power bikes in efficiency. So you're paying some penalty for the amount of power this motor has on your range side. I'm not going to do acceleration and braking test on that. I don't feel like there's a lot of benefit to a lot of people, but if you disagree, please leave a comment and I will shoot a acceleration and braking test on this bike. Coming a little closer, I'm going to do a little show and tell, show you around this bike. Lectric branded Stealth M24 motor back here. We got some nice beefy 27.5 inch tires. We have 180 millimeter rotors, and we have these unlabeled hydraulic calipers. Rear mounted kickstand, nice motor cutoff back there that's actually nutted together versus just pressed together. Got these folding bike quick release pedals, which it's kind of an interesting concept, but they have tons of crunch and play in them. So I'm not happy with these pedals. Got the lock spot here for your popping your battery off. We got this 80 millimeter travel suspension fork, same brake system on the front. We got a really interesting quick release through axle here, which is pretty cool. We do have lockout on our fork, nicely integrated headlight. The headlight works just fine. I have no problems with it. Like with most of these bikes, I'd also recommend a second light that you can more easily position instead of trying to reach down here. Got our chain ring here on the other side and that lock that I put on from Lectric. On the shifting system, we got a Shimano just real budget lackluster shifter. Do have the locking grips, throttle on the right, keypad over there on the left, and I'll fire this up so you can see the nice color display. Though at night this display is quite bright, and I haven't really had a lot of luck with the brightness setting in all those settings. So this seems to be I wish it wasn't as bright at night. That shifter goes back to this super basic Tourney rear derailleur that I need to adjust now. It's very basic. One of my favorite features of this bike is this stem mechanism, which I can just do with one hand. And you can see you can reposition both your bars and your stem. And then all you have to do is push this down and lock it back down. You're ready to roll. So I think that's this is a really slick stem. Rear light does not have brake light functionality. You can see I'm hitting the brake right now, but I will turn on the lights. See that light comes on there, as well as the light up there. The only thing I've done to this bike is I got a suspension seat post from Ebike products. They decided Lectric is using a different seat post diameter on this bike, and I think they're X-Peak than other bikes, a 31.6 millimeter. So I also had to buy an extra shim. I also got this lock. I had actually reached out to Lectric because the pre-order was taking quite a long time, and they said, you know, for your patience, we're going to send you a choice of a couple things, so I chose the lock. Other than that, this is the bone stock option without the rack. The rack package was not going to be delivered when I was going to be wanting this bike, and so the rack and the fenders. Plus, for me, if you can't get the fenders from the factory, removing the rear wheel to get the fender on there, especially that back bolt, is a real pain in the butt. So I'm just going to put on, it's got standard attachment points, so any rack would fit, though you're probably going to have to figure out what you want to do with this light. Torque sensor is right here, behind this pedal, kind of built into the bottom bracket. So you don't have the strain gauge back there that tended to be problematic on some other bikes. Derailleur hanger protector, if you think that thing's important, whatever. Keyholes on this side, just to show you how the battery drops out really quick. It's a little bit of a two-part process. You turn the key, which I just did, and then there's a button right here that allows you to drop that out. You can either just drop it on the tire and make it this way, or you can easily pull it out. Putting back in, nice positive click, and the key just comes out. That's a tour around the bike. We're going to take it for a ride. Then after we go for a ride, I'm going to badmouth this thing. All right, thanks for joining me on a ride today. Today we are in the Lectric Xpress, kind of a commuter hybrid kind of style bike. So you got this nice colorful display. Hopefully you can see it in the sun this morning. Layout of handlebars. The big selling points to me for this bike were actually a video on Ebike's products channel with the owner. One was the UL listing for the battery and the lab certifications for that, and also this torque sensor that's supposed to take a limited amount of input and to be able to get to 28 miles per hour in a multiple different, without a lot of pedal effort. This pedal assist level ties to a percentage power, so I'm going to crank it all the way up for the takeoff with the throttle. With the throttle, if you lean back a little bit as you give it full throttle on takeoff, it actually will raise the front tire off the ground a little bit. So I have this in, I'm going to put a table up on the screen that shows the different kind of like outside of the stock levels you can tie. You can change the throttle limits, the speed, pedal assist limits with some different cutoffs, which I think is a really cool option. I have this in almost the most turned up setting. You see here I'm in assist level 3, very little effort, cruise along at 15 miles per hour, and I'm going to go up and show you kind of how this responds. How it's almost mimicking a cadence sensor, but here you can see I back off to just what this would engage a cadence sensor, and if I'm not making some contact with the pedals, you're not going to get any assist. See, with almost no effort in this kind of kicked up level, I can maintain almost 20 miles per hour. So I'm going to try to just show you what you can do for speed on this. I have yet to achieve 28, but you can get in the mid-20s. It's taken some effort. The bike is very stable though. The ride is a little rough, just because of the geometry and this aluminum frame. Almost none of your weight is over the front fork, so you aren't really getting that much benefit from the suspension fork. It is a really nice ride experience, provided you are comfortable with what's coming through the seat. I'm going to try airing down the tires a little bit here shortly to see if that aids in the comfort. Right there, I had no idea, and they didn't say this in the literature. I'm finding out in a sticky sort of way that Lectric put slime in these tires. Now we're going to really test to this lowered air pressure. This is a notoriously poor piece of road. Definitely does make a difference on the smaller stuff you're riding over. Not as much of that like small shock is coming through the seat. The bigger bumps, you're still feeling those. It's just kind of a geometry thing. But it does help to lower the pressure in the tires. So I really think in a lot of ways this is probably the torque sensor for all. Like, it's probably the way torque sensors should have been instead of you know, on these types of bikes. So I'm in the highest assist level and one of the lowest gears. So what I can do is, you can see how responsive that torque is in this scenario. I mean, spool it up to just over 20 miles per hour there very quickly. So it makes for a very, I mean, you got to get used to it because it kicks in pretty hard, but it's a really fun, snappy way to ride around. And I think this could be a fun torque sensor style on a mountain bike. If you have the right bike frame style, this is not it, but it could be really fun in that use. There is no throttle in assist level 0. And from what I can tell, there's no way to change that. I always have trouble with that, honestly. So you can see how slow that was in throttle, taking off there in assist level 1. That's because these assist levels, like I mentioned, are tied to a percentage of max power. So you get a little more there. Each time you probably heard that. I think the nicest thing about some mid-drive torque sensors is the ability to put it in the highest assist level and control the amount of power output with your pedal effort. This, because it's tuned so sensitively, you can't really do that. We got this bike turned up and fully turned upness. As turned as you can be. Throttle, you notice there's a little bit of pause, so that kind of usually affects these runs a little bit. Do one.
It might be there.
Nice, real nice. That pulled up the hill really nicely. This higher torque motor does a good job on that. On your left. So we're in assist level 0 here. Of course, it's like a bike, right? You know, you do have resistance to that motor, so it's definitely harder to pedal than regular bike. Think about underinflated tires going into the wind. That's kind of what I would equate it like. It just feels bulky and heavy and rather poopy, honestly. One of the big selling points for this bike for me is that it's a torque sensing bike that has the ability to reach full class 3 speeds of 28 miles per hour without crazy amounts of input. Most torque sensing bikes that you can do that on, you're pedaling like a madman. So what this particular bike has, it comes as a class 2 e-bike. You can unlock it and it has this setting, and I'll put a couple of those pages on the screen, where it's got this multiplier and it has this whole page of different profiles you can set up for different amounts of force coming out of this torque sensor. The way they accomplished what they're doing with this torque sensor is what they say, for instance, the normal torque sensor, you input forces from 10 to 100. Well, this one's like from 5 to 20. So it's very much more sensitive to lower amounts of force. What that can do is that can make it also feel kind of twitchy. Now we're going to talk about the cons. One of the biggest cons for me is the throttle on this bike. Because it's using the same programming that we talked about during the ride, it's subject to the same amount of, so only it gets the same amount of output of power. So if you're pedaling in assist level 1 and you hit the throttle, you don't even feel anything. If you're pedaling in, level 3 and you hit the throttle, it depends on where you're pedaling, you'll get a little bit. And 5, you get the full throttle for like the full maximum output of the motor at level 5 with the throttle up to 20 miles per hour. Now I just think I think that throttle needs to be full power all the time. And here's one of the reasons I think this. If you take out from a stoplight and like me, you forgot to change yourself out of assist level 1 because you're not used to goofy ass throttles like this, you are going too slow. You can barely make it across the intersection. But on the other hand, if you have an assist level 5 and you had especially one of the amped up profiles that I used, and you kind of have your weight back, the front tire actually comes off the ground. So it's just like you have the throttle in my mind needs to be consistent, and this one is not. And I think that's a super weak point. The other thing you can tell, this bike is tall. It's a big bike, especially on the handlebar side. And so even though you have some adjustability here, it sort of still limits like what size riders. There's a lot of people, if you're under like 5'5", this bike is going to feel very large to you. And then on the size, this was advertised when I bought this at 58 pounds. So I was like, oh man, cool. It's going to be a bike under 60 pounds, which is not always easy to find in the budget category. This actually weighs in at 60 pounds, 62 pounds rather. So, it needs to go to fat camp a little bit in my mind. It's just a little tubby. It just kind of affects the overall handling of the bike. And while I talked about the torque sensor being a benefit on the other side, on the pros, it's actually a pretty major con too. So when you're riding kind of full out with a lot of force, you can kind of get a smooth operation of the torque sensor. When it's in the higher assist levels, you'll hear the motor kind of going, because it's very hard, because the torque sensor is so sensitive, to keep it at a steady amount of output. So it depends on how sensitive you are to that kind of thing. It's just kind of, it has some real benefits versus a cadence sensor, but then because it's so sensitive, it has some cons as well. The other thing this isn't really a deal breaker to me, but the components they used in this. I understand this is a budget bike, a $1,200 bike, so you can't expect the world. I always know that when I'm doing these reviews, I just try to point out everything you might find not pleasant, and a lot of that comes from poor component selection. And I think they did some of that on this bike. The brake calipers are terrible. They tend to stick, so a lot of times I'm riding and we'll hear drag. I have to tap the brakes to get it to release back off. And they didn't use any branded. They could have improved the braking feel so much. And I think if you're selling a torque sensing bike, which you're selling a more elevated riding experience from the torque side, you should carry everything along with that. So that might mean this torque sensor bike should maybe be more expensive with a little better components on it. Coming back to the other, like the fork, it's just with the geometry of the bike, you're not getting very much benefit out of it. And this shifter just feels so hokey, and because it's on the same side as your throttle, I had a number of times when I was first getting on this bike from another bike that's where the throttle is, where a lot of bike shifters are, that I kept hitting the throttle when I wanted to shift. Kind of dumb, but also like easy to do. And like I also said, the one things I would change are the handlebars. Just this, I wish there was a couple options for handlebars. Like I feel like a straighter bar would have actually worked better on this bike than this really city bar to me. I have almost 150 miles on this bike. I don't ride it anymore. I find the ride really rough for me. I put on the suspension seat post and it's still really rough. If you can kind of see where your weight is on this, like if you were sitting on the saddle and you're basically bolt upright with this posture, your center of your weight's back here in the back. So you get no real benefit from the front suspension fork. And for whatever reason on these types of frames, the shock goes straight up into the seat. And so this one is really brutal on my back, even with this seat post shock set to a lighter setting. So, I applaud Lectric for doing this and reaching outside of their normal realm of bikes. I just think, I think the mix is a tough one for me. So I personally, if I was to do this again, if I wanted this bike, I would probably buy the 500 watt version. And I would keep it in the more cranked up state most of the time, and hopefully I would tame some of those really too strong of a throttle issues, and maybe even get a little better efficiency out of this motor. If you have any complaints about my review about Lectric, if you want to complain with me, please do so in the comments. I try to address every comment, unless they're really stupid. But please leave a comment down below, and I hope to see you again on another video or something.